one another after each other जो है ये एक दूसरे के साथ रिकनेक्ट करके प्लीज़ गो थ्रू करें ताकि आपकी जो है वो ओवरऑल अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ द पोइम जो है वो डेवलप हो। तो आइए अपनी डिस्कशन को जो है वो कंटिन्यू रखते हुए आगे बढ़ते हैं। Dear students, as we were discussing some critical aspects of this poem, uh, we came to know that the poet wishes to convey the idea and theme of order in the poem, rather, an idea of order and balance in the universe, order and balance in the world at large. And that theme has been integrated through a picture that is of disorder and imbalance in that very little world that the poetess has created through her keen observation of a filling station that is both a presentation and representation of disorder and order at the same time. A picture that is impregnated with both the concepts of order and disorder at the same time, rather intertwined. Where there is disorder, there is order. Order emerges out of disorder, rather, you may say. The idea of the poem is meticulously spatial and deductive. The poem repeatedly posits us, the readers, into the order that is the poet's process against the disorder in this messy, oil soaked world of the family that the speaker jokes perhaps even oils the begonia instead of watering it. The theme of order allows this little filling station to function as a microcosm of the creator world by the poet. An ordering hand, rather, a balancing hand that keeps balance in this little universe and at in a larger context, a balancing and ordering hand that is present in shape of the divine force that keeps balance and order in the universe, unseen, just like the divinity. Here too, the ordering hand is unseen, but capable and beneficent like God. This is important point here. The comparison between the disorder of this very little world, the microcosm presented in this poem, and the comparatively on the whole at large, the world outside, the universe in the larger context, is also in the same shape. There is order and balance in everything God has created. Therefore, where there is a point of disorder or imbalance to be found anywhere, order emerges there to keep it a balanced in a balanced shape. An ordering hand that is unseen but capable and beneficent embroidered the dolly. There is some force that is embroidering the imbalance and disorder of the universe and the world at large. Waters the plant. This is also significant. Watering is creativity, productivity. Water springs up the plants, makes them grow, makes them live longer, gives them life. Water is life. In the same way, there is some divine force that is watering this world with balance and order and arranges the rows of canes. And it is the arrangement of the days and nights, arrangement of the sun and the moon, arrangement of this life and death, arrangement of everything around us, this environment, this habitat, this breathing house we are in, but also presumably nurtures or fills the father, the saucy sons, and even the family dog. बेटे ये जो आइडिया है ब्रिंगिंग ऑर्डर इनटू डिसऑर्डर and order emerging out of disorder, balance emerging out of imbalance, beauty emerging out of this messy type of scene. And this type of thing is the idea Bishop conveys to us as a poetess. बेटे ये वो आइडिया है कि जहाँ कहीं फितरत जो है वो कायनात में जो है वो बैलेंस बरकरार रखे हुए है, और जहाँ डिसऑर्डर होता है वहाँ ऑर्डर जो है वो इमर्ज होता है, और उस मिसमैनेजमेंट को, डीरेंजमेंट को, दिस इज़ a picture of a deranged, derided type of, messy type of filling station, in shape of a little microcosm, a small world compared to the larger world we are living in, we are inhabitants of. तो बेटे ये जो है comparison, it makes the poem a metaphysical presentation of its own kind and links it to the metaphysical poets of the 17th century. Bishop surely had been impressed by the metaphysics of the 17th century poets like Donne and Herbert, and others. And she picks these ideas from the metaphysical poetry to be presented in this modern shape of her own. Dear students, reasoning backwards from this fact, there is quite a solid evidence that the hand is a mother's hand. However, she is identified in the poem only as a somebody. Her tasks, ordering and beautifying, managing, arranging everything, balancing everything, are the tasks of creation indeed, ascribed to God Almighty. But Bishop was a confirmed atheist, to be remembered, whose private theology would be unlikely to admit this interpretation of the poem as being the presence of a divine being here. Clearly, though, the mother is a creative force behind uh, all this phenomena presented in this small microcosm of a filling station, the reader comes to know through her handiwork, and who, in the penultimate line, the line we read in the end of the poem, there is somebody that loves us all, directs her message toward the larger world, that is the world of the metaphysics indeed. अजीज़ तलबा व तालिबात, ये बात अब क्लियर हो जाना चाहिए कि छोटे पैमाने पर अगर हम देखें तो हम इस नज़म का मुताला इस लिहाज से, वो जो पॉइंट था कि ये नज़म जो है उस पर हम बहुत बात कर चुके हैं पीछे, कि ये नज़म जो है एक रिप्रेजेंटेशन ऑफ फेमिनिज़म है. Surely there is a voice of a woman speaking and voicing against the supremacy, the high-handedness of menfolk and in the world, suppressing the rights of women. You may say this is a common enough theme in the American poetry we read in the modern world of today. From 1950s to 70s, this type of feminist outlook and viewpoint is quite prevalent everywhere in American poetry, especially in the poetry of women poets. However, this second point to be elaborated is a very strong point. You may enjoy the poem as a small piece of disorder and order presented by the poetess in shape of a detailed descriptive painting of this filling station side by side, that house, the home, the domesticity therein. But again, you may have to go on to interpret the poem as a piece of metaphysics, as surely there are hints that Bishop was quite impressed by the works of the metaphysical poets, as I mentioned earlier in our discussion. तो बेटे ये जो है, there is some force in shape of bringing some order into disorder. There is some force in the universe that is bringing beauty, order, balance, arrangement, management of this vast universe, and that is somebody who loves us all. तो अल्लाह जो है वो अपने क्रिएशन को तन्हा नहीं छोड़ता। ये एक अगला आइडिया है। तो जहाँ भी जो है डिसऑर्डर क्रिएट होता है, वहाँ अल्लाह के ऑर्डर जो है वो फौरी तौर पर इंसान की मदद के लिए आता है। द पॉइंट ऑफ द पोएम इज़ another point of the poem is that modern commercial world that is in the hands of men has brought about disorder, derangement in the world of human beings. And then a force comes, the divine force, to help out mankind, to bring order into this industrialized uh, mess of the world, bringing beauty and order in this ऑयल सोक्ड वर्ल्ड ऑफ आर्स। तो बेटे ये एक आइडिया है, ये भी यहाँ जो है वो साइड बाय साइड जो है वो चलता है मेटाफिज़िक्स के साथ साथ। कि इंडस्ट्री ने जिस तरह से, एमरजेंस ऑफ इंडस्ट्री ने इंसानी ज़िंदगी को बुरी तरह से बर्बाद कर दिया है, तबाही लाई है, वैल्यूज़ को डिस्टॉर्ट किया है, ज़िंदगी को डिस्टॉर्ट कर दिया है, मैकेनिज़्म आ गई है, चारों तरफ जो है वो ब्लिकिश और ब्लैक माहौल है। ये इस माहौल में देयर इज़ सम पावर, अनसीन पावर, अननोन पावर दैट इज़ वर्किंग बिहाइंड द सीन एंड मेकिंग इट ए वर्थवाइल लिविंग प्लेस फॉर अस in this very world of the modernism. Dear students, repeating the idea and going into the deeper meaning of the poem, we have to go back to her biography, her life indeed. The idea of a home and mother carries emotional resonance in the poem. Surely, you may thus call it an autobiographical poem to some extent, particularly for Bishop, who at the age of 5 saw her mother for the last time. It is said that no author is ever absent from his writing. That is the case here. We find Bishop herself mirroring up in this poem. Her life is mirrored up here. Her life is being presented here in shape of the pains, the sufferings, the pangs she suffered as a child, as a girl, as a woman. When Bishop was 8 months old, her father died, and her mother suffered subsequent breakdowns that ultimately required her to be sent to some kind of a hospital or sanatorium to be treated there as a mental patient. And the girl was left alone in her early infancy, and this loneliness proved to be the companion she had to live with. बेटे ये तन्हाई जो थी, जो बचपन से उसके नसीब में लिख दी गई, वो तन्हाई जो थी, उसका सिक्लूशन जो था, ये सेल्फ सेंटर्डनेस जो थी, ये सारी ज़िंदगी उसके साथ कंपेनियनशिप में उसके साथ दोस्त रही, उसका साया बनकर, उसकी दूसरी ज़ात बनकर, उसकी रूह में ये तन्हाई, ये अकेलापन ये समा गया। शुरू से उसकी साइकोलॉजी का, उसकी रूह का हिस्सा बन गया। और यही उसकी पोइट्री का दुख जो है, दिस पैंग ऑफ लॉस, ये आपको उसकी ऑलमोस्ट सारी नज़मों में जो है वो दिखाई देगा। ये सफ़रिंग जो है, ये चूँकि लाइफ लॉन्ग सफ़रिंग है, तो ये उसकी क्रिएटिविटी में भी इसके जो है वो असरात। अक्सर आप ये जुमला अपनी लैंग्वेज में कहते हैं कि ये रिश्ते हुए ज़ख्मों का जो कसक है, ये हमारी पीछा नहीं छोड़ती है, इट रिमेन्स विद अस फॉर एवर एंड एवर। तो ये जो है, ये इसका भी पीछा छोड़ने के लिए जो है, जो गमे ज़िंदगी है, ये गोया गमे तन्हाई के साथ मिलकर जो है वो उसकी ज़िंदगी को जो है वो बना रहे हैं, बुन रहे हैं। ये एक ताना बाना है, वेब है जिसमें वो उलझी हुई है। और ये सब उसकी क्रिएशन को भी, उसकी क्रिएटिविटी को, उसकी पोइटिक एबिलिटी को, पोइटिक क्रिएशन को भी जो है वो साथ साथ जो है वो मुतासर कर रहा है। Then we may say that growing up in a family filled with issues, problems, twists and turns, her life was anything but normal. It was not a normal life at all. Bishop uses poetry to create order, beauty, and stability to an otherwise bland world of her own in which she was forced to live in. This can be seen by analyzing her poems on the on overall look. Sometimes it would take Bishop a few years to write a poem because she would focus on the small things one might overlook and make an effort to bring out the natural beauty of an object. She trims, polishes, retrims, and repolishes her poems time and again, revises the words, revises the phrases, revises her ideas, and to make it look like a perfect poem in the end. And this is her effort to bring and create order, beauty, and stability to her otherly, disorderly, and messy type of unstable life of her own. ये एक कॉन्शियस एफर्ट है बेटे। शायरा जो है वो जिस तरह से उसने जो है वो ज़िंदगी गुजारी है, डिसरप्टिव लाइफ, वो नहीं चाहती है कि ये जो उसकी रूह का जो ज़ख्म है वो लोगों तक पहुँचे। अगरचे वो उसकी क्रिएशन की शक्ल में पहुँचे तो हैं, उसकी लाइफ हिस्ट्री लगती है उसकी शायरी जो है। हर पोइट्री सीम्स टू बी her own story in wrapped in words, wrapped in phrases, wrapped in symbolism. लेकिन इसके बावजूद कोशिश वो करती है कि इसको ब्लेंड करे अच्छे खूबसूरत अल्फाज की शक्ल में छुपा कर, ताकि लोगों को जो है वो तकलीफ़ ना हो, उसके दुख जो है वो दूसरों को तकलीफ़ ना दें। Dear students, again it is to be noted that it is through her poems that Bishop creates order and a sense of belonging, belonging to something, belonging to this world, belonging to somebody rather, and splendor. Filling Station is a poem of two halves, we are now well aware. The first three stanzas being mostly light criticism aimed at the grimy place, and you may say that the grimy and messy world around us and its resident family, and the final three stanzas bringing a more optimistic tone to the temporary visit. It is this tension between first and second half of the poem that creates a depth of feeling for the reader, masterfully filled in with fine-tuned, observed details, a particular poetic talent of Elizabeth Bishop as a poetess. Dear students, we have already gone through a fine poem by Elizabeth Bishop, One Art. I provided it to you for reference reading for some other poet. Elizabeth Bishop was very aware of losing things, her father at an early age and her mother when she was a teenager, and then a lover later on in her life, and feeling deep loss. In her poem One Art, she asserts the art of losing isn't hard to master. And this poem referred here, One Art, is a very beautiful presentation of how she feels lost in this wilderness of the world. So this poem is far more than mere description of a dirty filling station to say. It tells the story of her life at a place a modern community needs to survive. Fuel and oil, industrialization, hints at a hardworking family missing a vital element, the mother. The hand that creates beauty brings order. The final line introduces the idea that if there was no all encompassing love, the whole scene would fall apart, rather combust indeed. तो बेटे, अगर मोहब्बत ना हो, ब्यूटी ना हो, ऑर्डर ना हो, तो सब कुछ बर्बाद हो जाएगा. Everything will go to dogs. Everything will go to dogs, will go to ruin, will go to destruction if there is no affectionate love, order, balance in life. Even though Bishop traveled extensively in her life and had a very vast experience of human beings, of places, of things around her, although she was not a very learned lady formally, yet she got a very good experience of life running through this from this place to that place. It was not the grand view of the world that interested her, the existence, and other topics like that. As one can see in filling station, she was more inclined to focus on the details of ordinary life, and this is the main feature of her poetry every day. She picks up minor things and gives them fabulous details to be seen as an important and significant feature of day to day life. Filling station recreates the scene in keenly observed visual and tactile detail of a family run gas station. It is not typical subject matter for a poem. Everything is startlingly dirty and oil permeated in this little cosmos, from the father's work clothes to the embroidered dolly. After observing the overall black translucency of this place, the poem's speaker begins to ask questions. Do they live in the station? After all, there is a dirty dog lying, comfy, on the greasy wicker sofa, and comic books are on a tabouret or wicker stand. Why these things? The voice asks. The question is not answered directly or immediately, but the answer is there. All these things are there, but they provide a hint that somebody is there to manage all this. From the embroidered daisy like flowers to the arrangement of softly chanting canes, the noise of the canes being dragged here and there, it finally concludes there is evidence somebody loves us all. Filling Station and other Bishop poems teach readers to look for aesthetic beauty or order in unlikely places. This is important. She finds beauty in disorder as well. The family run business, like that of the gas station in the poem, is an endangered economic species presented in the poem. Feminist criticism has significantly raised the awareness of gender and sex roles in literature. Dear students, now it is clear uh, through our reading of the poem, textual reading of the poem, that the masculinity of the filling station is suggested in rather traditional images. The father figure, sons, the oil, and the presence of a dog, all are masculine figures and images presented to show the uh, masculinity of this place. The automobile industry, rather manufacture, repair, and services, has been largely controlled by men at that moment of time in which the poem was composed, and this was still certainly the case during the decades from which Bishop draws on her memory and her perception of the world. Accordingly, this station is a father and son operation, menfolk operation, you may say. Moreover, the language of male sexuality is as pervasive as the petroleum there found. Dear students, as we have seen, Bishop's filling station is technically free verse, but even a quick glance at the page reveals that free verse is not free of form. It is all interconnected, interlinked. It is not shapeless or undisciplined or disorderly poem. Her free verse style is known for its disciplined accuracy of word choice, selection, that is, restrained emotion, no passionate feelings are there, and lucid description of the scene. Details are very lucid, very fluent. Dear students, Elizabeth Bishop was a poet who knew very closely both wealth and poverty. She was born in a wealthy family, well-to-do parents, well-to-do grandparents, but for reasons of health, spent several childhood years in her Aunt Maud's tiny tenements in Arroway, Massachusetts, and summers in the rural simplicity of Nova Scotia with her grandparents. As an independently wealthy adult herself, she traveled widely but not extravagantly. Such circumstances helped develop the fruitful tensions in a poem such as Filling Station, presenting both the scene. It is a humble scene of life presented in shape of a filling station where there is a simple living mm, we find in. She wrote the poem while living in Brazil in the 1950s, a place and time that spurred memories of her own strangely textured childhood. Dear students, so far we have discussed the poem in detail from point to point, from one theme of the poem to another, from one idea and perception of the poetess to another perception and perspective given in the poem. Let's now have some critical views of some critics about this poem and overall about the poetry of Elizabeth Bishop. First of all, Brett Millier observes that all her life Elizabeth had a romantic, aesthetic appreciation of poor people and the ways in which they made to do on limited resources, especially the ways they made art, creativity. Filling Station clearly shows Bishop's interest in the ways common people bring beauty into their lives from the most ordinary materials and resources at hand. थोड़ा वसाइल के बावजूद लोग जो हैं वो कैसे खूबसूरती से ज़िंदा रहते हैं. Simplicity brings beauty to life. This is where she excels. She presents life from the angle and point of view of a poor person, you may say. Brett Millier was also her biographer, and here Brett Millier quotes again Elizabeth Bishop often included Filling Station when she gave a reading of her own poems in the public, perhaps because it was a signature piece of her art. Perhaps she simply liked to read it, although not as often discussed and anthologized as most of her famous poems, as Man Moth, Armadillo, or Sestina. Filling Station in itself is indeed typical of Bishop's restrained style and acute, nearly childlike observation of ordinary things, places, and common people, taken from middle class strata of life, rather from very low strata of life. Then commenting upon this quality of her poetry, the critic William J. Smith notes that there has always been in Elizabeth Bishop's work a kind of childlike, primitive discovery of relationship, where she establishes through questions why, who, and what. And Filling Station is certainly typical of that poetic, primitive questioning habit of the poetess. Why the taburet? Why or oh, why the dolly? Critic Bonnie Costello suggests that Bishop's interrogative or questioning disposition is part of her fundamental desire for wholesomeness or wholeness in her life, her search for a resolution of the issues without reducing experience to simple answers. In this process of the poet's own genuine change of consciousness, says Costello, the questions somehow become our own questions. We do identify ourselves with the poetess while asking these questions. Dear students, and this is the epiphany, this is the revelation we get out of our poetry as readers. Then again, Charles Mann describes another important aesthetic habit of Bishop's poetry, her painstaking revisions, her careful shaping of language until the poem carries as perfectly as possible the emotional textures of her observation. The moose took no less than 25 years to write. It took her no less than 25 years, remember. At the Fish Houses, a very famous poem by her, revised at least 7 times in the focal point. This is the focal point of man's close reading of these poems. In filling station, one can see the result of what man identifies as our basic pattern of revision. A move from the poem being merely a series of intelligent, often prose like observations, to one that conveys these observations as sensually experienced presences. The movement of filling station, likewise, is from the oily surface of things to the presence behind their art, some kind of presence, the divine presence indeed. And this makes the poem a very beautiful poem to be read. Dear students, another critic, Robert Dale Parker, argues that Filling Station is ultimately a poem of supreme irony, established by that unspecified presence of the somebody in the last line of the poem. Parker suspects that somebody could just as easily be nobody, vice versa, that you may say. Or if that somebody is God, that is also suggestive of us all, that such a love might become only a greater irony if the love of God is no love we expect to know. C.K. Dostoevsky is less troubled by matters of irony than of gender, and believes that the poem's final mystery turns on the absence of an actual feminine presence. It means that Dostoevsky stresses on the gender discrimination presented in the poem, while Parker argues the ironic meaning found in the poem. Then there is an amazing thing to be noted, that she led a very disorderly, undisciplined life, but presented a very beautiful, balanced, and very disciplined poetry. As Donald Stamford, for example, talks about the tensions between Bishop's undisciplined life and her always disciplined poetry. Despite her restless, disoriented, and distraught life, he says, Bishop managed to write lucidly crafted, luminous poems. Stamford concludes, commenting on the same idea, and that is why a few of her poems have gained a permanent place in our literature as piece of great art. Dear students, for most of her life, Bishop's poetry was plagued by a critical failure of insight. Praised for her talent and her craft, her stories and poems were dismissed as minor, unimportant, merely descriptive poems. She was said to lack vision, depth, grand themes in her work, and was ignored by critics and audiences as well. Critics would praise her imagery, her metrics, her precision, her ability to make a story come to a conclusion. Elizabeth Bishop perpetually felt that she was an outsider in this world of literary creation, no matter where she was living, and many of her poems tell the story of life as a guest. She was considered a guest, an outsider in this world of literary creation. It is this kind of loneliness she suffered throughout her life. She remained a secluded child, ignored child throughout her life, and as an adult, as a poet, she was also ignored by the world. But she was not frustrated. She remained true to the details of the common things, and after her death, she is now recognized as one of the most important poets of America. For Bishop, questions are assertions, statements. However, open endedly, they structure experience and self awareness. Like compasses, they point to something absolute we can neither see nor get to. Yet in their pointing, they show us where we are. The poem can be read, this poem, especially the filling station, as a series of seemingly casual, sometimes quite charming and amusing observations that build to a climax of questions, each one apparently innocent, yet combining with the others to devastating effect, trying to devastate us as readers. Concluding our discussion on this poem, we may say that there is a clear technical debt here in this poem we find to the metaphysical poetry of the 17th century, written by poets such as John Donne and George Herbert. In fact, Herbert was not only a major influence of the young Elizabeth Bishop, but she retained a lifelong fondness for his verse as a poet. Dear students, another thing to be remembered is that she is often compared to Robert Frost for her choice of simple words and simple language in her poems. Robert Frost, as you know, is considered to be the representative poet of America, uh, who lived a century ago before her arrival as a poet. But still, she is often compared by certain critics for her simplicity of language, simplicity of things, speaking of simple themes of life as did रॉबर्ट फ्रॉस्ट. तो बेटे अक्सर जो है वो इसको रॉबर्ट फ्रॉस्ट के साथ कंपेयर किया जाता है, लेकिन ये उसकी डेथ के बाद ये क्रिटिक्स जो हमारे रिसेंट क्रिटिक्स हैं ये उसके बारे में इस तरह के ख्यालात का इजहार करते हैं कि जैसे रॉबर्ट फ्रॉस्ट की पोइट्री जो है वो बड़ी सिंप्लिसिटी ऑफ लैंग्वेज और सिंप्लिसिटी ऑफ थीम्स को पेश करती है, ऑर्डनरी थीम्स ऑफ लाइफ को पेश करती है, ऐसे ही एलिज़ाबेथ बिशप भी जो है वो सिंप्लिसिटी ऑफ लैंग्वेज, प्रिसीशन, लुसिडिटी और सादा ज़िंदगी जो है, रूरल लाइफ को रिप्रेजेंट करती हुई एक शायरा. तो ये बेटे हमारी तवील डिस्कशन थी. अगर कोई पॉइंट अनक्लियर रह गया हो तो प्लीज़ यू मे आस्क एनी क्वेश्चंस अबाउट द पोएम. Thank you very much, dear students, for participating in this discussion on a filling station. See you soon in our next discussion. Till then, it is Allah Hafiz and goodbye from my side. Thank you very much again.